This is Navigating Cyber Risk podcast with me, John Riley, and George Usey as your hosts. Join us as we explore the challenges faced by executives as they grapple with new and ever-changing cybersecurity mandates. Welcome to the Navigating Cyber Risk with your hosts, John Riley and George Usey. What are the challenges faced by executives as they grapple with the new cybersecurity mandates? Today, our guest is Seth Guntharp. So Seth lives next to the most dangerous river in the U.S. with moose, coyotes, and bears. Oh my. And then he also can climb mountains in a single day with his wife. And here we are with Seth. So welcome, Seth.
Hey, how you guys doing?
Great. Good to have you here. So we're just going to jump right in here and you know, coming from your background and everything, how would you explain the difference between cybersecurity and cyber risk?
Yeah, so cyber risk is all the threats that a company faces every day. Cybersecurity is what we do to mitigate, manage, assess, and respond to the threats or potential threats that a company is faced, whether that be an insider threat or whether that be a hacker on the outside or just social engineering, which I think is one of the bigger security threats today.
And so one's a little more proactive than reactive, or would you say?
Yes,
Okay.
I would.
All right. And so from that standpoint, I mean, what's the biggest risk that companies are facing today when it comes to cybersecurity or cyber risk?
So with cyber risk, I would think, from what I have seen, it's user awareness training or a lack thereof, social engineering. Everyone always talks about phishing emails, and everyone is always trained on phishing emails. You know, it's very hard to run into a company now that doesn't have some sort of phishing campaign going on to train their users. But when you actually come into contact with a real phishing email and it actually gets into a company from a user clicking yes to the $10,000 credit card they just won, like, things happen really quick, and the thing you thought never happened starts to unfold in front of you, and you're faced with this whole new set of circumstances that hopefully you have prepared, trained for. So I would say the number one risk is a lack of user awareness in the cybersecurity headspace, because most people think of cybersecurity as the IT guy in the basement downstairs that they only see when there's a problem. Nobody thinks of the end user. No one thinks of the CEO or the CFO as being, huge targets. And a lot of times they aren't trained to the manner that they need to be to combat the risk today.
Yeah, sometimes they find that they're too busy, or they're trying to do other things that they think are more strategic, but then they become the target because they are the ones that are willing to click on those things, or they're moving too quickly, or they're distracted by something else, and so it definitely causes that issue.
Absolutely.
I often wonder the challenges that executives face. It's when it comes to something cybersecurity related, if it's something they're not familiar with and they're not trained at all, it almost seems like there's a degree of or not being able to understand, whether or not they are actually experiencing, excuse me, whether or not they're actually experiencing a phish, right? So they think it's just a regular message, right? And I wonder if security awareness training is enough, if more intimate exercises are necessary, for the executive teams. I often wonder about that. What are your thoughts?
We have always found, or what we've started implementing is, in the beginning, we had generic awareness training. This is how to spot a phish alert. This is how to spot a scam, email. But we found out that targeted trainings and one-on-one trainings, though they are much more intensive and much more demanding on the IT side, they do help a lot better at actually real-world informing, like, a CEO or an HR manager, this is a scam, this is fake, and then how to address it. Because a lot of times a user will come across an email that's a phish, and they'll exchange 2 or 3 emails, kind of testing the waters. Is this real? Is this not? Before they actually get to the point of talking to the IT guy or the SOC manager saying, hey, this is suspicious. Let's look into it. By then they've already exchanged information to some degree. So a lot of times we have found that the generic awareness training isn't enough. and personal awareness training, or really the IT guy posing as a bad hatter to try to set up a real scenario, we found that trains users a lot more. So at this time, with the company that I'm with, all of our users are paranoid when it comes to emails. They're afraid to click on any link now, and that's how it should be. So from where we were at a year ago, we've come about a complete 180 in how we address user awareness training, and how we train our users. We found that the more personal approach, the sitting at the desk side by side with the higher executives, tends to get a lot better results.
Yeah, that's great. I do wonder as well, though, what did you do to make it a 180, right? Besides just adding personnel training. I mean, people had to like get on board and almost change their mindset. So what's your secret recipe there?
Yeah, that was the hard part. The hardest part of IT is dealing with the end user and changing habits that have been, ingrained for the last 15, 20 years for some of them when it comes to how they treat a computer or how they treat an email. And a lot of it was just, we took away a lot of the user's ability to do certain things on the computer, whether they couldn't go to certain websites, or they couldn't email certain things, or they couldn't copy text from an email to another email, or if they sent over a potential credit card, it would bounce the email back to them and say that, oh, you can't send this information. And while that was incredibly annoying to the end user, they kind of began to get the picture that, hey, this is something that I need to be paying attention to. I can't just send a password over a plain text email or even an encrypted email, and expect it to get received successfully without being seen by someone else who shouldn't see it. So it's a process that is not overnight. Training users on how to do something differently that's been ingrained in their head is one of the slowest things that I've seen coming into this position. I came from the school districts where we did this with 600, 700, 800 teachers, and it took us years before we got those few bad apples to figure out how to address emails, or how to not click reply all when telling everyone what the password to the Wi-Fi is. And a lot of times the IT guy is the bad guy, and a lot of times that's not received very well. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what I got.
No, it was great detail. I think it made me rethink the very simple, assumption that you're either using a carrot or a stick.
Yeah.
I think there's a third part there, which is the access. Like, what can you and can you not do? So almost, so is that really I think most users would see that as a stick, right? So,
yeah.
Were there any motivations from the executive, like using a carrot, like, hey, if you take this training, or get free stress ball toys, or any of that going on? Or
the motivation behind it was kind of from a higher up, was from the level that we had to have training to meet compliance. And there is a difference in security and compliance. You'll hear any security guy say that being compliant is not necessarily being secure. But what we found was that the level of compliance that we were shooting for with CMMC was, it was so ingrained in the executive level that we had to find a way to trickle it down to meet everyone, because it did affect everyone. And the executive level was very well versed in the compliance nature. But when you get down to the guys that carry the hammers and put on the tool belts and drive the work trucks, they don't care at all about it. All they care about is getting what's on the plans into reality. And it shouldn't be their responsibility to worry about cybersecurity. But when you're faced with, this user has a laptop, this user can't leave this laptop at McDonald's like they used to anymore, or can't leave it unlocked in their work truck when they're not there. That's a real security threat, and that's a real issue. So the training had to make its way down there. And I would say it was more with the stick than with the carrot. At the end of the day, the carrot works in some instances and it looks good on paper, because when you're looking at that completed list of everyone who's completed their awareness training and you see like green checks for 700 employees, that looks great on paper. That looks great from an executive standpoint. But when you actually go up to this user and say, hey, where's your laptop right now? And they say, oh, it's in my truck. Did that training really help? And so that's what we started to see. And that's where, unfortunately, the stick had to play a bigger role. And again, it depends on the company. It depends on whether you're like a law firm or whether you're, guys with hard hats walking around. It highly depends on the user and the nature of their work.
Yeah, so true. That your experience reminds me of what a gal named Dr. Christina Zwakur went through, doing the same thing, but for all the pilots at United Airlines. She was in charge of cybersecurity awareness training for all of United. And same thing, laptops. Where's your laptop, pilot? And obviously these access points, things that they have access to, are, they're sensitive, right? Flight schedules and flight plans and those sorts of things. But ultimately, how do you get those people trained? So because her challenge was they're in the air, and there's also collective bargaining as well. So how do you allot that time, right, to get those pilots cybersecurity awareness trained? Did you have a similar troubles, or are your workers not? Was it as easier or more difficult? Curious.
It was difficult at first. Now that we've been doing it for a year and a half, with the software company we're with now, it works. It's flawless. There's in the beginning we were faced with rolling out awareness training just to get the box checked for compliance, and eventually we rolled it into the maturity of our cybersecurity, where okay, we have quarterlies or we have annual security trainings, and we send out emails to all our employees saying you have to do this. And if they go past their training by a week or 2 weeks, we start getting notified, and eventually it gets down to the point where they don't work until that training gets complete, or they don't carry they can't carry a laptop onto a job site. They can't drive a work truck until we see that training is complete and they proficiently know it. So again, that's the stick method, and I'm sure there's carrot ways that work, but when you try to get an electrical engineer to sit down and watch a 45-minute video on cyber risk and mobile device management, I mean, I'll be honest, there's much better things that I would rather be doing with my time too than watching that video. But it is necessary, and the information in the video is good, and it actually really does stop threats in the real world if the user applies it. And that's why with cybersecurity, there's a layered approach. The first line of defense is the user. If whatever makes it past the user, you have everything else technical to stand in the way of whatever bad thing he clicked on.
So you mentioned before that you had done some CMMC items. How did in your opinion, how should CEOs prioritize cyber risk from that standpoint? I mean, it's probably more than just a want at that point. Is that correct?
You mean in relation to CMMC specifically?
Yeah.
Yeah. So CMMC has been growing on the cyber landscape for the past since 2015 to 2017, and in large part, CEOs have been virtually silent on it, at least from my experience in talking with other companies and attending cyber conferences. In large part because there's still so much ambiguity in the CMMC headspace. It's still very much a moving target of here's your compliance goal. We won't tell you how to get there, but you got to get there regardless. And oh, by the way, if we change it 15 times between when you start and when you get there, oh well. And I can see where a lot of companies shy away at that, because CMMC is one of those things that for the small company all the way up to the Fortune 500 company, the cost in implementing it is the same. It's in terms of how the security controls are implemented and the cost that has the upfront cost.
Right.
And a lot of small companies can't make that jump, at least not overnight. And a lot of companies can't make that jump over the course of 2 to 3 years just because the expense is so great. Yeah, does that answer your question?
forget talking about that and you know, kind of how the CFOs can create budget. We recently just helped a company that was a sub of a prime get with that prime, and they were able to get some funding from the prime to actually get to be able to continue what they were doing as a subcontractor. So there's definitely ways of doing it, because I mean, definitely finding the budget and understanding, you know, the need for those controls, and that there might be business that's being left on the table, specifically by not following through with either CMMC or other compliance items, whether it's SOC 2 or other, you know, other frameworks. There's a need for being able to protect data in today's world, and that's becoming more apparent through, you know, through the controls and through the frameworks, and that it's not just the technology anymore.
Absolutely. It's so much more than just the IT guy in the basement. It's so much more than just the firewall, you know, from 2006 that's been running nonstop for 15 years. It when you look at cybersecurity, especially in relation to CMMC or NIST 800, 171, 172, the mountain that you have to climb is almost astronomical. And that's exactly how our company went into it in the beginning, just 2 to 3 years ago. Well, we had that firewall from 2006. We had that Active running 2008. We were running all of that outdated, and it was terrifying. And seeing where we started from to where we're at now, it is not a quick process. You can throw all the money and all the resources in the world, and it's still going to take years.
Or being proud of how long a server's been up without being, you know, without being updated or rebooted or, you know, anything out. You know, the kernel is 15 years old, and look at how great I know. That's we've had to change some of those views from a technical standpoint, but definitely understanding it from the executive standpoint. I mean, they always want things up and available, but understanding the risk of how to get there and what those controls need to be, and doing patching and all the rudimentary things just to get there has always been a challenge for IT. Well, so I mean, there's all kinds of things that are happening today with between AI and obviously CMC and the compliance side of things. I mean, so from your perspective, you know, what emerging trends do you believe will have a profound impact on the cybersecurity in the future?
Everyone always tends to jump whenever this question is brought up. Everyone always tends to jump to AI being the newest, latest, and greatest thing. And don't get me wrong, I love AI. I love the AV platform Sentinel-1. It uses behavioral AI, and don't get me wrong, it's amazing. It's awesome. It's really cool watching it learn and form algorithms and all that. But emerging trends, I think, is really I'm seeing more and more companies pay a greater amount of attention to their cybersecurity posture. And I've just started seeing this more in the past year. MSPs are becoming more and more popular. They're popping up all over the place, and they're starting to learn how to cater to smaller businesses. And I've seen CEOs start to pay attention to cybersecurity, not so much with compliance, not so much with CMMC or NIST or HIPAA or whatever flavor of compliance you have, but just cybersecurity in general. That's been a trend that I have seen. Small businesses, you know, nonprofits, third parties, is like, okay, we have this, we're using Windows 7 laptops. We don't need to be doing this anymore. We have a 2016 Exchange server. We don't need this anymore. This is scary. I think with the introduction of AI, it has spurred more of a movement for companies to start paying attention to cyber, because everyone knows that whenever the IT guy walks into the accountant's office, you know it's about to be a bad day for both of them. It's because it's so expensive. And that's a conversation that nobody really wants to have with the IT guy and the accountant is the cost. But if you're asking what a trend that I've seen is, I've seen companies start to make more of a budgetary allowance for cyber, not so much tech, but for cybersecurity.
Right.
Yeah, there's been a few folks that I've spoken to, and they call it cybersecurity budget right sizing. No, so it's definitely top of mind. Well, as far as the journey is concerned, though, in terms of emerging trends. Of course, I think you're right on in terms of the default being AI. A lot of people point to that, but that has got a lot to do with the number one focus of most folks fighting in the trenches in cybersecurity, which is stopping the hacker. I think what we might be seeing now is, well, what we know we've seen is these CEOs and executives, even boardrooms, are getting dragged into the caring corner, as if you want to call it that. You know, I think there's a couple of reasons why. The number one reason, is I think a lot of the workforce now is they're more younger generation, and I think they get it, right? So us, gray hairs, right? Let's face it, right? So we grew up in a different kind of a mindset where the technology working was the most important thing, and every once in a while, cybersecurity was important. But I think the younger generation of workers and some of the stats that are coming out are showing that there's greater concern for the security in these new leading reports and results that are coming out of workforce development and those sorts of things. So I think that's one piece. I think the other piece is that there are now what essentially are privacy laws that are holding CEOs and board members accountable, like personally. They can go after them personally and civilly. And so I think that's obviously going to shake the tree, of the executive tree, a little bit, because now the CFO and the CEO are like, wait a second, I can't just replace the guy who fixes all the things with blinking lights anymore. I have to be accountable as well. I think so. There's probably some of that going on.
That was a little bit of a that was something that we realized too, and that was an unintentional tidbit of information we found out going into CMMC compliance, was that the CEO is just as responsible as the user all the way down that drives the work truck. When you get into privacy laws or the Fair Trade Agreement, the Freedom of Information Act, once you start throwing in all those clauses and all those regulations, it gets deep really quick. And that was always part of the contract that the CEOs or the estimator always just 50 pages of clauses, skip. And it comes back to bite them later on, and it didn't used to, and that's why everyone's always skipped it for the whole last 25, 30 years. But now everyone's starting to pay attention to it. Those clauses are actually starting to be enforced.
Yeah, people get pulled over.
Yeah, yep, very much so.
I still call that selective enforcement, when everybody's doing 80 miles an hour down the freeway and they pull me over.
It might just be that you're driving the bright red car, right? You don't want to be driving the bright red car.
Something like that.
That's when the IT expert comes in and says, red's not a good color. Let's change the color of the car. All right.
I go with blue today.
It's the color of my sleigh. Just kidding. So anyways, so when you think about a cyber disaster happening, what do you think that looks like from an executive standpoint? And when I say cyber disaster, I mean either losing data or having a hacker come in and steal it. I mean, do you think that most executives are ready for that, or practiced and ready to go, or are we, is it going to be something new that they're going to be playing the Super Bowl against somebody that has done this a million times, and they're still playing on the Pee Wee squad?
Yeah, this is a great question, because we've been going through this very, very recently with our CEO and our executives. So one of the biggest parts about my job is creating a risk assessment, and then creating an incident response list, an incident response form, and training my executives on how to handle an incident. So let's just say the ransomware. That's what everyone loves to talk about. Ransomware gets into a company, whole file server's encrypted, SharePoint's encrypted. It's a really bad day. It is not the IT guy's responsibility to inform the rest of the world that their company has been, breached. It is not HR's. It's the CEO's. It's everything under his watch. It's everything under his the buck stops with him. And if he's up in his office with no idea what to do, one, that doesn't look good from a company standpoint, and two, that's just more wasted time on mitigating the threat. I would encourage all CEOs, CFOs to look into a SOC analyst on their staff, or a SOC team as a service, whether that be an MSSP, just because the threats change so rapidly that it's impossible for just one guy to keep up with it all, or at least manage it. Lone survivor up at the top of the mountain. So when it comes to a threat and what the CEO does, having an incident response plan and testing it more than once a year, I would say is critical, because I need that. If ransomware strikes, I would like my CEO to go to the binder of the compliance binder, the holy Bible of compliance, turn to the incident response section, go to ransomware, and know exactly who to contact, whether that be cyber insurance, whether that be the SOC team, whether that be me, or whether that be a news channel. So many things come into play when you deal with a company-wide breach, and unfortunately, a lot of it is politics or the public image of the company. This doesn't play so much so into a small mom and pop shop defense contractor, but to a Fortune 500 company. Yeah, they better have a statement out pretty quick and prepared. I would say having an incident response plan and testing it thoroughly, and that CEO needs to know exactly who to contact as quickly as possible.
And practice.
Yes.
That's it. Yeah. So I think the interesting thing is the why for a CEO, which you explained rather clearly. The map really is risk management for them. And every CEO is concerned about, obviously, producing revenue, reducing costs, and dealing with substantial risk. Right? Those are kind of the three typical compartment areas besides innovation. And but I do wonder if my initial comment on how there's two motivators for CEOs to be more involved, the third is absolutely revenue. So there's a third one, right? So hey, whether it's the court of public opinion or a customer saying, hey, we see that you had an incident, you're not getting that contract, so that becomes a revenue problem for them,
right?
So
that's
the other piece. That's the third motivator: revenue generation.
And dealing with compliance, depending on what clauses you have in your defense contract with the DoD, if there is a breach that is company wide, or even if it's compartmentalized, in some instances, you have only 24 to 48 to 72 hours, depending on the severity, to report that to the DoD. And that's something that a lot of companies don't realize that you have to do, because there's very, very specific channels that you have to communicate to them with. You can't just call the FBI office and say, hey, we've been breached. That won't cut it. There are extremely specific regulated guidelines in dealing with defense industrial base contracts in the DoD. And if you don't follow those guidelines exactly, you're out of compliance, and you could potentially lose any continuing contract awards because of that, just on negligence. Negligence is not an excuse for not knowing the contract that you that the company signed. And that's something that we've noticed a lot, is that the actual, without getting into the nuts and bolts, but talking about the nuts and bolts of how you actually deal with an incident, that's time, and time is money. And if that company's down, they're losing money. And for an incident that you report to the DoD, yeah, you're going to be offline for 72 hours minimum, even if the threat is mitigated, just in dealing with all the compliance regulations around it. That's something that a lot of companies don't realize.
Yeah. And I think there's also, and maybe John, you may be more educated on this, but there are sanctions for CMMC as well. So if I remember correctly, it's by the control. So if control is found faulty, then there's a penalty associated with that if it gets into the weeds. So now it starts to cost you money. But John, do you recall whether or not that's happening? I know that under the False Claims Act, there's issue that can get a CEO in big trouble. But the fines are what do you recall on that one?
I mean, it's definitely been proposed. I mean, I'm not going to say one way or the other whether it's been, definitely that way. But what I can say is that even if you're not DIDCAC or, if you're not doing CMMC, all 50 states have still passed breach legislation that you have to, report that you've lost data, especially if it contains PII data. So this isn't just a DoD thing. This is if you collect data, if you work within a customer's data or anything else, I mean, you've got to be able to do that. And then so those controls become very important, and the practice of what happens when you do get a breach and how to manage that. So.
Thanks. I just couldn't remember whether or not that went through, but that's the other side of the coin, right? So the accountant in the room is going to want to know that. Right. So what is that? What's that actual financial risk? What was your experience like going to the accountant for what you needed? Was it pleasant? Were you on the same page, or was it a bit of a fight? Or if you're willing to,
Yeah, no. This is a fun one. The CMMC roadmap in the very beginning. So it's gone through several revisions. CMMC 1.0, 2.0. And then you introduce NIST revision 3, which is going to be finalized or may be finalized here soon. All that plays together. All that has changed so much. So like 3 years ago, when I was looking at this CMMC journey in front of me, I had no idea what the actual cost was going to be because it was so ambiguous as to how some of the language was interpreted. For like mobile device management, the CMMC clearly states you need mobile device management. It's like, okay, what kind? Well, what's acceptable? What's not acceptable? Your cost can be anywhere from $30,000 a year all the way up to $180,000 a year just for satisfying one control, depending on the size of your company. And so planning that out while the target is still moving was difficult. So it was one of those things where you'd walk into the accounting office once or twice a week, say, hey, I need another 30, or hey, I need another 50. And some of that, it was hard for us as a company to budget it. But looking back on it now, I could absolutely budget it now that I've done it. Hindsight's 2020. And a lot of it has firmed up in the past year. So for a company that's never heard of CMMC, looking at it now, in today's world, it would be a lot easier for them to make a budget because a lot of it has firmed up. But 2 years ago, we had no idea what it would actually cost, what we would actually need. And then you throw in FedRAMP compliance, and that makes that just crosses off, hundreds and hundreds of potential software vendors that companies have been using forever. And they have to move to something new. And it takes time and energy and money to train users on how to use new software. We had to do that with 4 or 5 of our applications. It was just a hard, nope, you can't use it anymore. And that took months, to implement that, to train them, and to get us to a point where we were actually, we felt like we were making money again with the software we had instead of it being a time waster. So I had no problem walking into my accountant's office and saying, hey, I need to purchase this new server. I need to purchase Intune or SentinelOne. And if we don't have it, we don't get contracts. The goal at the end of the tunnel was always CMMC is going to limit the defense industrial base's ability to market. If a company isn't CMMC certified, they can't bid on contracts. It's great for the ones who are CMMC certified. That marketing pool just got a lot smaller, and they could potentially win a lot more contracts. And I'm all for that from the perspective of the guy who's almost certified. But the cost was a lot. But the goal at the end of the tunnel, the light at the end of the tunnel was always, we're going to win a contract with this. It's going to hurt right now, but at the end of the day, this will get us to that CMMC certification. This will allow us to keep bidding on contracts. And is there any other way around it? Absolutely not. Is there a cheaper way to do it? Probably. Yes. If you were to ask me, a year from now, was there a cheaper way we could do it? Yeah. but was I sure that it was going to get us to compliance at the time? No.
Yeah, that balance is a tough. So when you're breaking new ground, it's especially tough. And I think that's what the lesson learned, in my opinion, is that whether you call it the cyber AB or, you know, the DIB in general, was no one had done it just like you. I was like, how do I budget for it? Right. So there's got to be firsts. And you're right. You're absolutely right. Now, today, right, it's going to be a little easier. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So just that it's not simple, but it's going to be less difficult than it was.
Right. Yeah. Like now today, I could look at a company that's never heard of CMMC before. Let's say I go into their company and I could give them a list of all the tools and things that they would need to achieve compliance with the FedRAMP compliant tools, like all the technical stuff they need. I could market that out really easily. That's not hard to do now that it's done. The cost comes in with your number of users you have, number of specialized users you have, and where your controlled information lives, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud. So the algorithm for it now is very, I wouldn't say it's very straightforward, but it's a whole lot clearer than it was 2 years ago.
What I find interesting is as you go, if you kind of travel throughout the world in terms of tech and cyber, is that, you know, how other countries deal with cybersecurity, and you know, there are differences, but there are similarities. And what resonates with me in that example is that concept of what you said, that concept of actually going through the exercise and looking at a company that has not traveled, and you can look and say, oh, okay, well, yeah, here's, you know, this is what you're, you know what to do, right? So I think that what you learn in other countries is that there are very specific guidelines that they tend to follow, like, and so there's roadmaps and blueprints for them to do some of these things and certifications. One of them is the ISO, so International Standards Organization, right? But everyone still has the same problem, which is leadership, right? And making sure that from a budgeting perspective and leadership, so they have to use these bodies of work in ISO to say, you know, this is what it says and what I have to do according to the certification. So
Right. And it's interesting because if I were to walk into, you know, someone building a bank, and I was their IT guy for the bank, you know, I'm following FDIC standards. You know, I have a plan, tested, tried and true roadmap to follow. If I'm walking into a healthcare, you know, clinic, you know, I'm following HIPAA. I'm following HIPAA to a T. That's a planned, you know, tried and tested, true compliance tree that I follow. But for CMMC, you know, they've given us the roadmap and they haven't given us the goal, and it changes, and it's so much open for interpretation. So from a CEO's perspective, I absolutely see where they're hesitant, but then I also absolutely cannot stand the fact that they are so hesitant. Like, I understand their perspective, but I also know that if they don't get on the ball with this, it's going to take years.
yeah. Well, once bitten, twice shy is what I've seen a lot of executives, me included, go through that emotional roller coaster, right? So especially when it comes to regulations in California specifically, so which I'm sure you've been watching the news, a lot of businesses leaving the state.
Mm-hmm.
So it's because you're told this and you do it, and then you find out that they've changed the rules or that's not going to work. And so you invested all this time and money, right? And let's face it, the CMMC with 1.0, right? They had that problem, right? Mm-hmm. So there were 5 levels, and you know, so
there were 3, and
now surprise, it's down to 3, and you know, and I mean, there was definitely some challenges, and you know, so the lessons learned. If you were a CEO looking at CMMC a couple of years ago, right, you were on it and you didn't do it, right, you're going, phew, see, they changed it, and you know, so it's that issue of you know, are they going to change the rules on us, right? And that's the issue with compliance. So.
It's double Dutch. When do I jump in?
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly like that, John. Yeah.
Interesting I liked your word choice. When do I jump in? From a CEO's perspective, I can speak on that not for my company, but on other companies that that are in the DoD headspace with us, like side by side with us. They're asking that exact question. When do I jump in? And I think a big incentive for them to jump in now is the cost of the certification. So let's say a company jumps on board and it takes them 3 years to get CMMC certified. So CMMC certified 2026, 2027, if they're lucky. Every other defense industrial based contractor in the United States, which is what, over 200,000 individual companies, maybe 300,000, they're all thinking and wanting to do the same thing. And how many C3PAO RPO assessors are there in the world? Under 20.
Yep, like 12 or
Yeah.
15.
Yeah. 6 months ago, there was 3. A year ago, there was 3. So that number is growing, but still that number will never get to the demand that it needs to be. What that's going to do is push back certifications, push back time where you cannot bid on a contract, and it's going to skyrocket that price. So like just to talk real for a second, if you get in now with the CMMC world, that cost is going to be less upfront for the cost of that audit. But for a company with 200 employees, if they're competing with other companies, that price for that audit, time is money, and there's only so many C3POs out there. That price is going to go up. So there is an advantage for jumping on the bandwagon early, because that price is potentially going to be lower. I can't say that for certain, but how economics works, if there's less demand, price is lower. More demand, price is higher. That is not lost in the CMC world at all. You see Microsoft doing that with their GCC high pricing. You saw that last September when they redid their contracts for a lot of their pricing schemes. So the writing's on the wall in a lot of ways. But yeah, there is an advantage to companies jumping in early. It's just, if you jump in early, you run the risk of maybe being the guinea pig, which is kind of what we're doing.
Well, one thing that we used to say quite often was, like GAAP is to accounting, NIST CSF is to cybersecurity in this country. So we used to say that a lot. But what's interesting is that in accounting, you can look at, what do you look for? A CPA, right? A certified public accountant, right? So there's guardrails there for that. And but in cybersecurity, right, the first iteration of something that can be audited is
there's no baseline.
Well, FedRAMP as well, but in terms of smaller businesses in the DIB. But my other observation is that not only do you have this challenge of dealing with the certification process, but you have to look at the auditors as well. The very few auditors that are out there, and that they change the rules on auditors as well. Mm-hmm. Now they want you ISO 27001 certified, which I found very interesting, that change, because it's almost, well, we're doing okay, but just to be sure, we're going to make the auditors go through ISO 27001, which is the first time that I've seen something like that, at least specifically within the NIST body of work, saying, okay, you got to do both. Mm-hmm. So if they're going to require the auditors to do that, at what point do you think ISO 27001 will, possibly break through amongst the DIB? And, not today, clearly, but, there are signs there that the world is getting smaller in regulatory issues. And that's really the issue we see when we talk to people that have gone through the CMMC, is some of them have these other lines of business, and they may have HIPAA, they may have issues with data privacy laws, and so they got to stack all these things together. Mm-hmm. And how do you track all of that stuff, right?
And the one of the greatest tools that we've used as a company was mapping where our controlled information was. Like, if it's not controlled, government doesn't care about it. DoD doesn't care about it. If it's controlled, oh yeah, they're paying attention to it. And it's scoping and making that scope as small as possible, making that target of where that data is stored as small and constricted as possible. That will help, like, companies that deal with HIPAA, that deal with NIST, that deal with 7012. That will help them greatly, is just knowing where to keep their data. knowing how to store their data. And
Yeah.
that brought the scope from us down from, a whole company down to just bits and pieces of it.
I think that's interesting because in a way, that's the difference between information security and cybersecurity.
Yeah.
They're different. They can be different. So,
Seth, thank you very much. So tell us a little bit about you. I mean, who are you? How did you get to where you're at?
Yeah, so I moved to Alaska with my wife in 2020. I came from a school district background. I have a bachelor's in cybersecurity. I have a couple associates in network administration and cloud security, on all those certs that go with it, I guess. Certs in my mind don't really prove knowledge, though. Experience proves knowledge. Um, I've seen that too many times. I've been burned too many times by that. But yeah, I moved up here and started working for school districts up here, and eventually was brought on with the defense company I'm with now, because I knew a few people there, and they said, "Hey, we have this thing called cybersecurity, and compliance, security. We're going to throw you into this." And I was like, "Sure, I'll accept the challenge," having no idea what I signed up for. Uh, and It's been a roller coaster ride, just understanding the compliance side of it. I was never a compliance specialist. I was always the guy that fixed the server or the guy that fixed the computer. I was a very much nuts and bolts, hands-on IT technician. And so I went from this role of hands-on work to, writing policies, procedures, and still doing the hands-on work. And it was a great challenge, and dealing with doing it all in Alaska where it's 40 below outside, 3 months out of the year, and driving to work at 1 a.m. because your server's offline and your truck won't start because it's 40 below and there's 5 inches of snow on the ground. So it's I love it. It's fun, it's difficult, but I wouldn't change it for anything.
yeah, the challenge of the truck roll, as we might say. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so what piece of advice would you give our audience? So if there's a specific action item or anything, what would you give them to reduce their regulatory risk?
In regards to CMMC or cybersecurity in general?
Cybersecurity in general. We'll keep it high level.
Okay. One piece of advice I would give is the network administrator, security officer, systems administrator, whatever the company has for their IT team. I would say they need to start having regular meetings with their CEOs and the accounting departments. They need to have a better relationship. The accounting department needs to, and the IT team need to be one. The department needs to know that cybersecurity is the company, and it is the most for the company, and that's just the nature of what it is. I would encourage CEOs, CFOs to look at cybersecurity as an investment and see it as something that is a process. It is a maturity model. Like with CMMC, it's a cybersecurity maturity model. Cybersecurity is great, and it's great only if it is mature and if it's set in stone and if it's practiced every day. And the IT guy can't be the one to start that ball rolling. It has to start from the top and roll down. The IT guy is more of a facilitator, at least in my opinion, he needs to be. But the real push behind making a company secure and getting everyone on board, it starts with the higher ups. It starts with the executives, and they need to be on board. There needs to be good communication between the IT guy and the CEO.
All right, Seth, how can people reach you if they want to reach out to you?
So I am on LinkedIn. You can search my name on LinkedIn. You'll find a very outdated picture of me, probably. I'm also on Facebook. You can search me on Facebook. I do enjoy. I don't enjoy. I love talking about the nuts and bolts of IT. I am more than happy to share my experience personally on how we implemented certain controls and compliance. That's fun for me because it's every compliance control that we've achieved is a little mountain that we've climbed and said we did that, and I enjoy sharing my pain and struggle on how we got there.
All right. Well, Seth, thank you very much. We appreciate your time, and it's been a really great conversation. And I'm pleased that you've actually made it through the CMMC. And you're not quite certified yet, but you think you're ready. You're pretty much almost ready to be there for your company.
Yep.
It's an amazing accomplishment, and I'm happy to see it. And hopefully more companies will take that journey. So again, thank you for being a guest here today. For our listeners, I hope you've learned something today, and this either laughed or cried or thought about starting your journey on the CMMC journey there, or some other compliance if you need it. And this has been it. This is another great episode of Navigating Cyber Risk with your hosts, John and George. We'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Seth.
This was another amazing episode of Navigating Cyber Risk, powered by Omnistruct. Show us some love by subscribing and sharing today. Reach out to us with any comments, questions, or ideas about future shows by emailing us at podcast@omnistruct.com. Until next time, remember, governance is not a technology.